When we talk about self-respect, we often imagine it as a loud, defiant stance, something that shows up in arguments or big, dramatic moments. But in reality, self-respect is far more subtle. It often begins in quiet reflection. It begins when you start to notice how something consistently makes you feel unseen, unheard, undervalued. It's that little tug in your gut when you compromise one too many times, or when your needs are repeatedly sidelined for the sake of keeping the peace. That's where walking away really starts, not in anger, but in awareness. So many people confuse self-respect with being selfish, especially when they've been conditioned to equate love with sacrifice. They think that if they leave a relationship, a job, a friendship, especially one where they've poured a lot of time and emotion, they're being ungrateful or cold. But here's the truth. Self-respect and selfishness are not the same thing. Selfishness is about disregarding others. Oh, self-respect is about not disregarding yourself. Walking away doesn't mean you don't care. In fact, most people who struggle to walk away do so precisely because they care too much. They've spent so much time trying to be everything for someone else that they've slowly abandoned themselves in the process. Walking away is the moment you say, I deserve to be considered too. It's reclaiming the parts of you that were slowly being silenced, your voice, your needs, your peace of mind. People will often ask, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm walking away from something I could have fixed? The better question is, what is it costing you to stay? Because staying out of fear of being wrong is still a decision. And often, it's a decision that erodes your confidence day by day. Self-respect isn't about never having doubts. It's about being honest enough with yourself to say, even if I can't perfectly explain it, I know this doesn't feel right for me anymore. And let's be clear, choosing yourself doesn't require a permission slip from anyone else. Not everyone will understand your decision, and that's okay. Not everyone has lived your experiences. Not everyone has felt the weight of the compromises you've made. And not everyone has your vision for who you want to become. Self-respect means making peace with that and choosing to move forward anyway. Walking away can be painful, especially if you still care about what you're leaving behind. But it is often the first true act of coming back to yourself. It's the moment when you stop negotiating your value and start protecting it. You're not walking away to hurt anyone, walking away to hurt anyone. You're walking away because you finally realize that staying would continue to hurt you. And that is not selfish. That is growth. That is self-respect in act. There is a painful but powerful truth we all must learn at some point in life. Just because you've invested time, effort, or emotion into something doesn't mean you're required to stay, especially when that investment is no longer being met with appreciation or respect. Whether it's in a romantic relationship, a friendship, a family dynamic, or even a workplace, your presence should never feel like something you're constantly having to justify or prove. We live in a culture that often romanticizes endurance, a stick it out, a loyalty matters most. And yes, loyalty is beautiful, but only when it's mutual. Loyalty should never become a prison sentence. The moment you're in a space where you're consistently undervalued, where your contributions are overlooked, your voice is minimized, or your needs are ignored, that's a sign. Not of your failure to try hard enough, but of the environment's failure to recognize your worth. There is a difference between patience and self-betrayal. Patience says, I believe things can improve, and I'm willing to give them time. Self-betrayal says, I don't feel valued here, but I'm staying because I'm afraid to leave. One is hopeful, the other is harmful. And the longer you stay in places where your value isn't seen, the more you start questioning that value yourself. That's the danger. You begin to internalize the neglect. You start shrinking. You work harder to be noticed. You make excuses for why someone isn't showing up. And before long, you're carrying the weight of a connection all on your own. The truth is, real connection, whether personal or professional, is not something you have to chase. It's something that's built together. It's reciprocal. It breathes because both people are showing up. If you're always the one reaching out, always the one initiating, always the one giving, ask yourself this: what would happen if you stopped? Would the relationship die in your silence? If the answer is yes, that's not a relationship. That's a performance. You don't need to make grand exits or dramatic announcements to reclaim your value. Sometimes it's as simple as quietly stepping back and observing what happens when you stop trying so hard. The people who truly value you will notice. They'll feel your absence. they'll step forward. But if no one does, if the silence is met with silence, that tells you everything you need to know. It's not about expecting perfection or demanding constant attention. It's about mutual presence, mutual care, mutual effort. You deserve to be in spaces where you're not just tolerated, but celebrated. Where you're not walking on eggshells, wondering if you're too much or not enough. Where you're not negotiating for crumbs of attention, but are met with the same energy you bring. Remember this. Your time, your energy, and your presence are not obligations. They are gifts. Give them where they are valued. One of the most painful misunderstandings people carry is the belief that walking away makes them just like the people who left them. Especially if you've been abandoned before, emotionally or physically, you may fear becoming the very thing that once hurt you. But there's a fundamental distinction that needs to be made here. Not all exits are the same. The why and the how behind your decision matter deeply. Abandonment is reactive, it's impulsive, it lacks communication, empathy, and closure. It's what happens when someone exits your life without warning, without explanation, leaving you to make sense of the mess alone. It creates confusion, it damages trust, and often it's done without consideration for how the other person will carry that wound. That is abandonment. But when you walk away after months, maybe even years, of trying, of communicating, of making space, of holding on longer than you should have, that's not abandonment. That's self-preservation. That's choosing your peace after exhausting every other option. That's not about harming someone else. It's about finally stopping the harm being done to you. It's important to be honest with yourself. Are you walking away to punish, or are you walking away to protect? If your intention is to escape accountability, to avoid discomfort, or to cause someone pain, then yes, it may be a form of running away. But if you've reached a place where staying is no longer sustainable for your emotional health, and you've done the internal work to understand your reasons, then leaving is an act of self-love, not cruelty. One of the kindest things you can do for yourself and for others is to leave with integrity. That means being clear, not cold. It means owning your truth without blaming. It means giving someone a respectful goodbye, even when you know they may not receive it the way you hope. You don't owe people your continued presence at the expense of your sanity, but you do owe them the same dignity you'd want if the roles were reversed. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do for both you and the other person is to walk away, especially if staying would only lead to resentment, bitterness, or further damage. Staying in something just because you're afraid of how it will look from the outside is a trap. You're not responsible for making your decision palatable to others. You're responsible for being honest with yourself and acting accordingly. There's nothing noble about staying somewhere that slowly chips away at you. And there's nothing shameful about removing yourself from a situation that no longer reflects the respect and care you're willing to give. Walking away doesn't mean you're heartless. It means your heart has finally asked you to come home. A lot of people think of boundaries as walls, as cold, rigid barriers meant to keep people out. But real emotional boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about protecting your peace, your time, your energy, and ultimately, your future. They're not there to control other people's behavior. They're there to guide your own. They help you decide what kind of experiences, relationships, and environments you are willing to be part of. Every time you allow something that feels wrong, every time you stay silent when something crosses a line, you're sending a message. Not just to others, but to yourself. That message is, this is okay. And once something becomes okay, even when it hurts you, it becomes part of your normal. And that a normal doesn't stay confined to a single situation. It leaks. It shapes your expectations, your standards, and your self-image. Boundaries are the line between self-respect and self-abandonment. If you let today's disrespect slide, you start training yourself to expect less tomorrow. You begin to adapt to discomfort, adjust to mistreatment, and settle for situations that chip away at your confidence. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself they didn't mean it. You convince yourself to be understanding at the cost of your own clarity. But what you tolerate becomes your pattern, and your patterns create your future. Think about it this way. When you repeatedly allow people to interrupt your peace, ignore your needs, or overstep your values, you're essentially writing a silent contract that says, I will carry the emotional cost of your behavior so you don't have to. Over time, that emotional debt builds interest. It becomes resentment, burnout, and sometimes even the loss of your sense of self. Setting emotional boundaries isn't always loud. It's not always a confrontation. Sometimes it's a simple decision to respond differently, to say no without guilt, to stop explaining yourself when it's not necessary, to stop overextending just to be liked. Boundaries are a form of emotional maturity. They say, I take responsibility for how I allow myself to be treated. You can't control how people behave, but you can absolutely control your proximity to it. And here's the truth. The people who are meant to stay in your life will not be threatened by your boundaries. They will respect them, even if it takes a moment of adjustment. The ones who push back the hardest are often the ones who benefited from your lack of them, from your lack of them. So when you draw a line, you're not being mean. You're being intentional. You're designing your future by protecting your present. Boundaries aren't about building a perfect life. They're about building a life that honors who you are and who you're becoming. Healing is often misunderstood. We're taught that if something matters, we should fight for it. We should hold on. We should push through. And while that's sometimes true, what people don't tell you is that not everything you fight for is meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be released, not because they didn't matter, but because holding on is no longer helping you heal. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't care. It doesn't mean you gave up. It means you've reached a point where your peace matters more than your attachment. It's the quiet decision to stop reopening wounds just to prove that they're still there. It's recognizing that not all closure comes from conversations. Sometimes it comes from your own clarity. When you start to see that trying harder won't fix what's fundamentally unaligned, you begin to let go, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Many people associate letting go with weakness or failure. But the truth is, it takes incredible strength to walk away from something you once hoped would work. It takes maturity to say, this chapter is over, even when you don't have all the answers, or when the ending feels unresolved. Holding on can feel safe because it's familiar. But healing isn't about staying where you feel stuck. It's about finding the courage to move forward without needing to drag the entire past with you. Sometimes we hold on because we think the pain will get easier if we just wait. But time alone doesn't heal. What you do with time is what matters. And if that time is spent ruminating, replaying, and resisting reality, then healing slows. True healing begins the moment you stop asking, how can I get this back? And start asking, what is this trying to teach me? Letting go with grace means you're not wishing anyone harm. You're not trying to erase the past or pretend it didn't matter. You're simply choosing to make peace with what was so you can protect what will be. It means carrying the lessons, not the weight. It means choosing forgiveness, not always for their sake, but for your own freedom. And grace isn't just about how you treat others. It's about how you treat yourself. It's resisting the urge to beat yourself up for staying too long or not seeing things sooner. Grace is what allows you to release the guilt and the shame that often attach themselves to heartbreak. It says, I did the best I could with what I knew then, and now I know better. You don't have to force healing. You don't have to rush it or prove it to anyone. You just have to keep choosing the path that doesn't cost you your peace. And sometimes that path begins the moment you finally let go, not with anger, but with acceptance. There's a dangerous lie we sometimes tell ourselves, that staying quiet in the face of mistreatment is a sign of strength. That if we just take the high road, say nothing, keep the peace and avoid confrontation, we're being mature. But the truth is, silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just self-abandonment in disguise. Sometimes it's the way we protect others at the expense of ourselves. When you say nothing while someone consistently crosses your boundaries, you're not keeping the peace. You're keeping them comfortable while your inner peace slowly dissolves. You're teaching them that their behavior is acceptable. You're showing them that they can disrespect you without consequence. And whether you realize it or not, that pattern is shaping the dynamics of the relationship because you're telling them, this is what I'm willing to accept. We all like to think that people will just know how to treat us. That kindness will be returned, that love will be mutual, and that basic respect is automatic. But the reality is, people take cues from what you allow. And if you keep showing up with more patience than self-respect, more silence than honesty, more tolerance than truth, people will keep taking more than they give. Now, this doesn't mean you need to yell, blame, or shame. Speaking up doesn't have to be aggressive. It just needs to be honest. You can calmly say, "That didn't feel okay to me," or "I'm not comfortable with the way that happened." Boundaries aren't confrontational, they're clarifying. They don't push people away, they draw the line where connection can be safe, healthy, and real. It's also important to understand that not everyone will respond well when you stop abandoning yourself, especially if they've gotten used to you being the one who always compromises, always forgives without change, always puts their feelings above your own. But don't let their resistance make you question your right to speak up. If your honesty ends a relationship, it's because that relationship was relying on your silence to survive. There's nothing mature about tolerating disrespect. There's nothing strong about enduring pain that could be avoided with a boundary. True maturity isn't about how much you can suffer in silence. It's about how deeply you're willing to respect yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it means saying, this can't continue. You teach people how to treat you every single day. With your words, yes, but even more so with your silence, your reactions, your choices. Every time you let something slide that hurt you, you reinforce the idea that it's okay. And every time you speak up, even in small ways, you raise the standard, not just for others, but for yourself. You're not here to be endlessly patient with what breaks you. You're here to protect your peace, speak your truth, and build connections that honor your worth. Of course, here is the expanded version of the 7th keynote. And not everyone who walks away from you is the villain. And not everyone you walk away from is the victim. Don't confuse emotional decisions with moral ones. In a grounded, emotionally intelligent tone similar to Matthew Hussey's style, without a heading or repeating the keynote, it's easy to slip into black and white thinking when a relationship ends. Someone leaves and suddenly we paint them as the villain, or we decide to walk away and guilt creeps in, whispering that we've hurt someone who didn't deserve it. We create stories to make sense of pain. Someone has to be right, someone has to be wrong. But human relationships are rarely that simple. The truth is, not every departure is about good guys and bad guys. Sometimes people walk away because they've grown in a different direction. Because the connection, while once meaningful, no longer feels aligned. Because they've been quietly battling with something you can't see. And yes, sometimes they walk away poorly, without closure, without kindness. But that doesn't always mean their decision was malicious. Sometimes it's just messy. Sometimes it's simply human. On the other side, when you choose to walk away, it's tempting to turn the other person into a helpless victim so you can justify your choice. But not everyone you leave behind is someone who deserved it. You might walk away from good people, loving people. People who showed up in their own way but couldn't meet you where you needed them. That doesn't mean you're cruel. It means you're being honest about what you need in your life. The key is understanding that emotional decisions, those made for your peace, growth, or safety, are not automatically moral failures. Choosing yourself does not make you selfish. Protecting your energy doesn't mean you've become cold. And leaving someone behind, even with love still in your heart, does not make you heartless. It's okay to miss people you had to walk away from. It's okay to feel hurt by someone who had to leave you. But that pain doesn't need a villain to be valid. It just needs your acceptance. Let yourself sit with the discomfort of knowing that two people can be doing their best and still not be right for each other. Let yourself grieve without turning the story into one of blame or shame. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is say, "This person isn't bad. I'm not bad. But this no longer works, and I don't need to make someone wrong to make it right for me to leave." Emotional clarity doesn't always come wrapped in justice. It doesn't always look fair. But if you're acting with integrity, compassion, and self-awareness, then your decision deserves respect, even if it's misunderstood. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. And you don't have to carry the weight of roles like hero or villain in stories that were never meant to be reduced to that. What matters is that you're living in truth, not performance. Choosing what's right for you, not what looks good from the outside, and letting go of the need to always have someone to blame. There are times in life when we cling to someone, not because the connection still brings us joy, peace, or growth, but because we've entangled so much of our identity with the relationship that the idea of letting go feels like losing ourselves. It's not the relationship we're protecting, it's our sense of self. And in that fear, we confuse familiarity with compatibility and comfort with love. Letting go of a relationship doesn't just mean losing a person. It means losing the version of ourselves that existed with them. The routines, the roles we played, the future we imagined, all of that feels like it gets erased in an instant. So we hold on, even when we know deep down that what we're holding on to isn't right anymore. Not because we're in denial of the truth, but because we're terrified of the space the truth will leave behind. That fear is powerful. It whispers things like, what if no one ever loves me like this again? Or, who am I without them? It creates the illusion that our worth is somehow wrapped up in this relationship continuing, even if it's not serving us. And because of that fear, we start shrinking ourselves to make it work. We tolerate more. We ignore red flags. We silence our intuition. But here's what's important to understand. Fear of loss is not the same as love. Love builds you. Fear binds you. Love lets you grow, even if that growth takes you in different directions. Fear keeps you small and stuck, convincing you that without this relationship, you'll be nothing. That kind of fear isn't love. It's dependence. It's completely human to be afraid of who will be without someone. But fear doesn't mean you're not ready. It just means you're human. The truth is, the version of you that only exists in this relationship may not be the version you're meant to stay in. And sometimes you can't find the next version of yourself until you step away from the one that was built in someone else's shadow. You don't have to have all the answers to walk away. You just have to be willing to face the unknown. To believe that your wholeness doesn't depend on being chosen, needed, or validated by someone else. The real growth happens when you stop clinging to the idea that your value is tied to a relationship and start reclaiming it from within. Letting go isn't about denying the past. It's about trusting that your future doesn't require you to keep repeating it. And you'll never know who you are becoming until you give yourself the space to find out, without needing to be somebody's something in order to feel like you're enough. There's a narrative that gets pushed onto us, especially in relationships, that staying through dysfunction is a virtue. That enduring emotional chaos, mixed signals, broken promises, or volatility makes you loyal, resilient, even loving. But the truth is, enduring chaos is not a reflection of your strength. Often, it's a reflection of the roles you've been conditioned to play, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who holds it all together at the expense of their own emotional sanity. We sometimes stay in chaotic situations because we've mistaken unpredictability for passion. Or because we've been taught to perform, to try harder, explain more, compromise endlessly, just to keep things from falling apart. But that's not peace. That's emotional labor. That's being trapped in a constant loop of trying to earn love in environments that only respond to effort, not honesty. Walking away from that isn't dramatic. It's clarity. It's a decision to stop performing in a dynamic where your emotional well-being is constantly being traded for temporary stability. It's found in not having to weather the storm every other week just to feel. When you choose peace, you're choosing presence. You're choosing relationships where you don't have to over-explain your needs or justify your standards. You're choosing stillness over survival mode. And that decision will often be misunderstood by the very people who benefited from your willingness to stay in chaos. There will be people who say you gave up too easily, that you're being cold or unreasonable. But what they're really saying is, I was comfortable with the way things were, even if it cost you. Choosing peace challenges that comfort. It disrupts the imbalance. And that makes people uncomfortable, not because you're wrong, but because you've stopped participating in a system where your emotional exhaustion kept the relationship running. The truth is, peace isn't passive, it's active. It requires discernment. It requires boundaries. It requires boundaries. It requires the courage to say, I love you, but I can't keep abandoning myself to stay connected to you. That's not selfish. That's self-aware. We have to stop glorifying emotional endurance as the gold standard of love. Love doesn't have to hurt. It doesn't have to be dramatic to be deep. And relationships don't need chaos to be meaningful. They need consistency, communication, and mutual respect. So when you walk away, not to punish, not to control, but to protect your peace, you're not being difficult. You're being honest about what your soul can no longer carry. And you're giving yourself the space to finally breathe, think, and rebuild in a place where peace isn't the exception. It's the foundation. Self-rescue is one of the bravest acts a person can perform because it forces you to face something we often avoid, your own fears. It asks you to look inward, not outward, and realize that sometimes the biggest barrier to your freedom is the comfort you've wrapped yourself in, no matter how unhealthy it may be. Comfort is seductive. It whispers that it's easier to stay where you are, to keep things familiar, even if that familiarity is painful or limiting. But real growth and real healing don't come from comfort zones, they come from discomfort. Choosing self-rescue means making the decision to prioritize your well-being above everything else, including the fear of the unknown. That fear can be terrifying. It's the fear of being alone, the fear of change, the fear of losing people who have become part of your life, even if they don't treat you right. It's the fear that you might fail if you try to rebuild your life on your own. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward in spite of it. When you decide to rescue yourself, you're choosing to be the hero of your own story instead of the victim of circumstances. It means refusing to wait for someone else to save you or validate your pain. You become your own champion, your own protector, and that level of responsibility can be daunting. It asks you to be honest with yourself about what's not working and to have the humility to let go, even when it's hard. It's also important to recognize that self-rescue is not a one-time event. It's a process. Some days you'll feel strong and ready to face the challenges. Other days you'll feel overwhelmed and want to retreat. That's normal. Courage is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about showing up for yourself every day, even when you don't feel like it. In choosing yourself, you send a powerful message to yourself and to others that your happiness and health matter. You set a new standard for how you allow yourself to be treated and how you expect to be valued. And while self-rescue often means walking away from people, situations, or patterns that no longer serve you, it also means walking towards something better, a life aligned with your true worth and potential. Remember, it takes strength to stay, but it also takes strength to leave. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can give yourself is to step away from what's familiar and safe, to embrace uncertainty, and to build a new foundation, one where your peace and well-being come first. Self-rescue is an act of love, not just for who you were, but for who you are becoming. It's the courageous step toward freedom, growth, and ultimately toward a life you're proud to live. Walking away is one of the hardest decisions a person can make. It's not easy to close a chapter on something you invested in, whether it's a relationship, a friendship, or even a phase of your life. But walking away is not abandonment. It's not a failure or a betrayal. It's an act of profound self-rescue. When you walk away, you're choosing yourself over a story that no longer serves your growth, your happiness, or your peace. There's a misconception that leaving means you're giving up, that you're somehow less committed, less caring, or less worthy. But the truth is, staying in something that drains you, that diminishes you, or that hurts you doesn't make you strong. It makes you stuck. It keeps you trapped in a narrative where your needs are sacrificed on the altar of obligation or fear. Walking away means you've reached a moment of clarity. You realize that your life is more important than any drama, any expectation, or any idea of what a should be. You understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to let go, not to hold on. Because holding on when everything inside is telling you to leave is the real form of abandonment. Abandonment of your own self-worth, your own dreams, and your own well-being. This decision isn't about punishing others or creating villains. It's about reclaiming your power and choosing a different path, one that honors your authentic self. Walking away allows you to stop rehearsing pain and start embracing possibility. It gives you space to heal, to grow, and to invite in the kind of life that reflects who you truly are. It's important to remember that walking away doesn't erase the past. It doesn't mean that what was shared wasn't real or meaningful. It means that what you want next is different, and that's okay. People change, needs change, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to acknowledge when something has run its course. Choosing to walk away is not a sign of weakness. It is a declaration of self-respect. It says, I deserve peace. I deserve happiness. I deserve to live a life that feels good to me. And that declaration is powerful. It's a foundation for building something new, something better. In the end, walking away is not about leaving people behind. It's about stepping forward into a life where you no longer sacrifice yourself for stories that limit you. It's about choosing freedom, dignity, and the kind of love that starts with honoring your own soul. If you want, I can help put all these expansions together into a full speech or assist with anything else. At the end of the day, walking away is not about failure, shame, or weakness. It's about the courage to choose yourself when everything inside is telling you that the story you've been living no longer serves your growth or your peace. It's about understanding that self-rescue is an act of love, a love that begins with honoring your worth and saying yes to a future where you can truly thrive. You don't owe anyone your silence, your pain, or your presence when it costs you your well-being. You don't have to stay stuck in stories that keep you small or in relationships that diminish you. Walking away is not abandonment. It's the most powerful way to reclaim your life, your happiness, and your freedom. So remember this, choosing yourself is never selfish. It's necessary. It's brave. Wow. And it's the foundation for building a life where you are whole, respected, and deeply at peace. When you walk away with grace and clarity, you aren't closing a door. You're opening the way to a new chapter filled with possibility, growth, and true self-love. Your peace matters, your happiness matters, and walking away, when it's time, is the greatest gift you can give to yourself.